The ring caught the last rays of sunlight as Juliana Rojas handed it over, and for a moment, she could see her mother's hands on her wedding day 30 years ago, gold worn thin by decades of work. A tiny diamond, more chipped than stone, that had survived poverty and violence and loss. The only thing of value her mother had ever owned, pressed into her daughter's palm at the Bogota bus station with tears and prayers and promises to be careful. Now it glittered in the smuggler's dirty fingers as he held it up to inspect, and Juliana knew she was watching her last connection to home disappear. But that was 6 hours ago. Now, in the absolute darkness of the New Mexico desert, with the cold seeping through her thin jacket and strange sounds moving in the brush around her, she would have given anything to have that ring back. Not for its value, not even for what it meant, just to hold something familiar while she waited to die. The journey had started 3 weeks earlier in Colombia, in the small apartment where she'd lived with her mother since her father's death. The eviction notice gave them 30 days. Her mother's job at the textile factory had ended when the owners moved operations to Vietnam. Juliana's work cleaning offices paid barely enough for food, nothing left for rent. Her cousin in Denver had been sending the same message for years. Come north. There was work here, a chance for something better. But the price of that chance, between the plane tickets she couldn't afford and the coyotes who promised safer passage, might as well have been $1 million. Until her mother pulled out the small velvet box she'd hidden for 3 decades. The ring wasn't worth much on the market. Any pawn shop would have offered maybe $200 for the worn band and tiny stone. But to them, it was everything. Her father had saved for 2 years to buy it. Her mother had worn it through 40 years of marriage, through raising 3 children, through burying 2 of them. It was their history made tangible. Take it, her mother insisted. Sell it in America. Use the money to get established. Then send for me. The ring had already given her a lifetime of happiness. Now let it buy her daughter a future. Juliana made it as far as Juarez before the money ran out. She'd paid for buses through Central America, for bribes at checkpoints, for food and shelter along the migrant trail. By the time she reached the Mexican border city, she had $40 and a wedding ring she couldn't bring herself to sell. The coyotes at the border operated like travel agents from hell, different packages for different budgets. The premium option included fake documents, comfortable transportation, guaranteed delivery. The economy version meant walking through the desert with minimal guidance. And for those with nothing, well, there were always arrangements to be made. She met El Chueco at a migrant shelter near the bridge. He was different from the others. Older, calmer, with the weathered face of someone who'd crossed the desert more times than he could count. He listened to her story without the predatory gleam she'd seen in other smugglers' eyes. When she mentioned the ring, he didn't immediately grab for it. His offer was simple. The ring as collateral, not payment. He'd get her across, connect her with people in Albuquerque who could help her find work. Once she earned enough, she could buy the ring back. He even let her take a photo of it with a borrowed phone, proof that he had it, promised that it could be reclaimed. She should have wondered why his terms were so generous. Should have questioned why a man who made his living exploiting desperation would offer what amounted to a loan. But hope makes people stupid, and she was drunk on the possibility that she might actually make it. The crossing group was small, just 5 people, 2 brothers from Honduras who'd been deported before and knew the route, a woman from El Salvador with her teenage son, both fleeing gang violence, and Juliana, clutching a plastic water bottle and trying not to think about the ring in El Chueco's pocket. They crossed the Rio Grande at sunset, water swirling around their waists, muddy current trying to pull them downstream. On the American side, El Chueco led them through brush and arroyos, moving with the confidence of someone who could navigate by the stars. The brothers helped the mother and son over rough terrain. Everyone shared water, shared encouragement, shared the electric feeling of having made it to American soil. For 3 hours they walked. El Chueco set a steady pace, not too fast for the teenager, not too slow to attract attention. He knew where border patrols stationed themselves, where sensors were placed, where the safe routes ran. This was clearly a man who kept his promises to hundreds of migrants before, which made what happened next so much worse. They stopped at a crossroads in the middle of nowhere. Rest break, El Chueco announced. Drink water. Catch your breath. In 10 minutes, they continued to the pickup point where a van would take them to Albuquerque. The hardest part was over. The Salvadoran woman collapsed with relief, her son fanning her with his baseball cap. The brothers shared the last of their food, already talking about the construction jobs waiting in Houston. Juliana sat apart, calculating how many days of work it would take to reclaim her mother's ring. That's when she noticed El Chueco on his phone, speaking too quietly to hear. His body language had changed, nervous now, glancing at the group, checking his watch. When he hung up, his weathered face wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. Change of plans, he announced. The van couldn't make it to the original spot. Too much Border Patrol activity. They'd have to split up. The brothers would come with him to one pickup point, the mother and son to another. And Juliana? Someone would come for her soon. Right here. Just wait. The protests were immediate. They'd paid to stay together. Splitting up wasn't safe. What if Border Patrol found them? But El Chueco was already moving, gesturing for the others to follow. The mother looked back at Juliana with worried eyes but kept walking, pulled along by her son and the promise of safety just ahead. Wait here, El Chueco told her. 30 minutes maximum. The driver knew exactly where to find her. Stay quiet, stay hidden, and she'd be in Albuquerque by dawn. He patted his pocket where the ring rested, reminding her their deal. Would he abandon someone who could buy back such valuable collateral? Then they were gone, swallowed by the darkness, and Juliana was alone. The first hour wasn't too bad. She found a cluster of rocks that provided some shelter, settled in to wait. The desert was beautiful at night. Stars scattered like diamond chips across black velvet, the moon painting everything silver. She could hear coyotes calling in the distance, but the sound was almost comforting. Wild dogs announcing their territory, nothing more. By the second hour, doubt crept in. No headlights appeared on the dirt road. No engine sounds broke the silence. Her phone, the cheap one she bought in Juarez, showed no signal. The temperature was dropping faster than she'd expected. October nights in the high desert brutal after the day's warm fled. The third hour brought fear. Every sound became Border Patrol agents creeping through the brush. Every shadow could hide dangers worse than deportation. She'd heard the stories at the shelters. Women found days later, victims of bandits or worse. Men who died of exposure just miles from safety. The desert didn't care about your dreams. It just consumed whatever entered its domain. By the fourth hour, she knew the truth. No one was coming. El Chueco had taken her mother's ring and left her to die. Maybe he'd planned it from the beginning. Maybe something had gone wrong with the pickup. The why didn't matter, only the what. She was alone in the American desert with half a bottle of water and no idea which direction led to salvation. The cold was the worst part. Colombia had its mountains, but nothing like this bone-deep chill that seemed to pull heat from her core. Her jacket, adequate for Bogota evenings, was useless here. She tried jumping jacks, running in place, anything to generate warmth. But energy meant sweating, and sweating meant freezing faster once she stopped. She built a small shelter from tumbleweeds and rocks, remembering something from a survival show about insulation. It helped barely. The wind found every gap, carrying the scent of rain that never fell. Her hands were numb first, then her feet. She tucked them under her body, curled into the smallest ball possible, and tried not to think about freezing to death. The coyotes came closer around midnight. Not the four-legged kind, actual coyotes. The desert's apex predators. She could see their eyes reflecting moonlight, keeping their distance but definitely interested. Were humans prey to them? She didn't know. Didn't want to find out. She found rocks to throw if necessary, practiced her best threatening yell. Worse than the cold, worse than the fear, was the loneliness. She'd never been truly alone before. Always her mother, her community, the constant press of city life. Here, she might have been the last person on earth. If she screamed, no one would hear. If she died, no one would know. She was a ghost haunting her own death scene. She thought about her mother, probably awake in Bogota, praying for her daughter's safety. Thought about the wedding day that Ring had witnessed, Young people full of hope, never imagining it would one day be traded for a chance at survival. Thought about all the migrants who'd made this journey, succeeded or failed, each carrying their own desperate reasons. Around 3 in the morning, hallucinations started. Her father appeared, young as he'd been in photos, telling her to get up and walk. School friends called her name from the darkness. Once, she could have sworn she heard her mother singing the lullabies from childhood. The desert played tricks when hypothermia set in, offering comfort that would kill if accepted. She forced herself to move, walking in circles around her pathetic shelter, slapping her arms. Anything to keep blood flowing. The water was long gone, but eating snow would lower her core temperature faster. Every survival show had taught that. Though what did TV know about the specific hell of being abandoned at a crossroads between nations? The wildlife sounds changed as dawn approached. Night hunters giving way to day's shift. She'd survived the darkness. But what now? Walk in a random direction and hope for rescue? Stay put and praise anyone. Found her before the sun turned the desert into a different kind of oven? That's when she saw the lights. At first, she thought it was another hallucination. White beams cutting through pre-dawn darkness, moving systematically across the landscape. But the engine sound was real. The crackle of radios speaking English. Border Patrol, searching their sector with the mechanical efficiency of people who did this every night. She had a choice. Hide and risk dying of exposure, or reveal herself and face deportation. The ring made the decision for her. Not its absence, but its meaning. Her mother had given up her most precious possession, so her daughter could have a chance. Dying in the desert honored that sacrifice. How? Better to be sent back alive than to become another anonymous skeleton discovered months later. She stood on the highest rock, waving her arms in the headlight's glare. The vehicle turned toward her immediately, more lights joining the first. They approached carefully, weapons drawn but not aimed. Professionals dealing with a routine situation. Just another migrant who'd gotten separated from her group. Nothing special about her desperation. The agents were surprisingly gentle. A woman officer wrapped her in a space blanket, checked her vitals, offered water and a granola bar. They asked questions she didn't answer. Who brought her? How many in the group? Where were they headed? She gave them nothing but her name, knowing it didn't matter. The outcome was predetermined. At the processing center, she was one face among dozens. Families with children, young men trying to look tough. Everyone wearing the same expression of exhausted defeat. They took fingerprints, photos, basic information. Someone would review her case, they said, determine if she qualified for asylum. The process would take time. She knew better. Colombia wasn't at war. She wasn't fleeing persecution. Being poor wasn't grounds for asylum, no matter how grinding the poverty. They'd keep her a few days, then send her back with papers saying she couldn't return for 10 years. Standard procedure for economic migrants with no criminal record. In the detention center. They call it a temporary holding facility, but everyone knew what it was. She met others with similar stories. The woman in the next bunk had traded her grandmother's necklace for passage. The teenager across the way had given coyotes his father's watch, a family heirloom worth more in memories than money. Everyone had sacrificed something irreplaceable for a chance that turned to ash. Some had been robbed outright, others abandoned like her. A few had made it days into America before being caught, tasting freedom before it was snatched away. They compared notes on coyotes and routes, warning each other about specific guides. Though what could it do now? She thought constantly about the ring. Was El Chueco wearing it? Had he sold it already? Or was it sitting in a drawer somewhere, just another trophy from another desperate woman who'd trusted the wrong person? The photo on her phone, they'd let her keep it, showed the ring on her mother's hand at her quinceanera, the last time they'd all been together as a family. After a week, they put her on a bus to El Paso, shackled to her seat like a criminal, though her only crime was wanting to work. The woman next to her wept silently the entire ride. A man across the aisle muttered prayers or curses, maybe both. Everyone stared out windows at the America they'd never really see. At the bridge, they removed the shackles and pointed south, handed her papers that made her inadmissible for a decade. Told her she was lucky. No criminal charges, no permanent ban. Just turn around and walk back to Mexico, back to whatever life she could build from the ruins of this attempt. Ciudad Juarez looked different as a destination rather than a waypoint. Dirtier, more dangerous, full of other deportees with the same stunned expression, trying to figure out what came next. The shelter she'd stayed at before wouldn't take her. They served northbound migrants, not southbound failures. She found another that would, in exchange for kitchen work. Calling her mother was the hardest thing she'd ever done. Harder than leaving home, harder than handing over the ring, harder than accepting she'd failed. Her mother's voice broke when she heard Juliana was safe, but not in America. The ring? Gone. The future they planned? Evaporated. All that remained was a daughter stranded between countries, and a mother who'd sacrificed her past for nothing. But her mother, strong as the ring had been, refused to let despair win. Stay in Juarez, she counseled. Find work. Save money. Try again when you can. The ring had been just a thing. What mattered was that Juliana lived. They could build new dreams on that foundation. So she stayed. Found work in a maquiladora, one of the foreign-owned factories that lined the border. The pay was nothing by American standards, but survivable by Mexican ones. She rented a corner of a room from a woman who'd been deported 5 years ago and never left. Learned the rhythms of a border city, where everyone was from somewhere else. The other workers had their own stories. Some had been deported multiple times, each attempt ending the same way. Others were saving for another try, convinced the next coyote would be honest. The next route would work. A few, like her, were just existing, caught between the country they left and the country that wouldn't let them in. She sent what money she could to her mother. Not much, but enough to help with rent. Enough to prove the sacrifice hadn't been completely wasted. Her mother never asked about the ring, and Juliana never volunteered. That chapter was closed, sealed like the border she couldn't cross. Sometimes, walking home from the factory, she'd see El Chueco's type hanging around the migrant shelters. Different faces, but the same promises, the same lies wrapped in false compassion. She wanted to warn the desperate people listening, tell them about cold desert nights and rings that bought nothing but abandonment. But who would listen? Hope made people deaf to warnings. At night, when the factory noise died and the city settled into uneasy sleep, she'd dream about that crossroads. Sometimes rescue came. The promised man appearing just as cold turned deadly. Sometimes she found the ring glowing in the sand, returning it to her mother with stories of American success. But mostly she just stood there, caught between nations, between past and future, between the person she'd been and whoever she was becoming. 6 months passed. A year. She learned English from American supervisors who praised her work ethic, while paying her 1/10 of what they'd pay across the river. Saved money with obsessive focus, though for what she couldn't say. Another attempt seemed impossible. She was in the system now, fingerprinted and cataloged. 10 years before she could try legally, and by then her mother might be gone. The anniversary of her crossing attempt found her at the bridge, watching the endless flow between countries. Business travelers and tourists moving freely while others planned desperate nighttime crossings. She touched her ring finger, empty now, remembering the weight of gold worn thin by love and labor. That's when she saw him. El Chueco, older and grayer but unmistakable, talking to a young couple near the shelter. The woman was showing him something, jewelry by the way it caught the light. The same gestures, the same false sympathy, the same promise of collateral instead of payment. She should have walked away. What could she do? Report him to police who probably took bribes from his operation? Confront him and risk violence? But watching him perform the same ritual that had stolen her mother's ring, she couldn't just leave. She approached the couple after El Chueco left, told them her story in quick, urgent Spanish. The crossroads, the abandonment, the ring she'd never see again. Showed them a photo on her phone. Her mother young and hopeful, wearing the ring that had bought nothing but heartbreak. They listened politely, but she could see the skepticism. She was just another bitter deportee, jealous of those still trying. El Chueco had promised. El Chueco had references. El Chueco would take care of them. They walked away, the woman clutching whatever family treasure she was about to trade for lies. Juliana went back to her rented corner, her factory job, her life in limbo. But something had shifted. The anger she'd suppressed for a year had found a target, not just El Chueco, but the entire system that fed on desperation. The coyotes and cartels, and employers who profited from human need. The borders that turned movement into mortal risk. She started talking to journalists who covered migration, shared her story with human rights groups documenting abuse, warned new arrivals about specific coyotes, specific routes, specific lies. It wasn't much. Voices like hers were common as desert sand. But it was something. A tiny rebellion against the machinery that had ground her up. The ring was gone forever. The crossing remained impossible. Her mother grew older in Bogota while she aged in Juarez. Two women separated by lines on maps and men who sold false promises. But she'd survived the desert, survived the abandonment, survived the death of one dream to build something smaller but more honest. Late at night, in dreams, she still stood at that crossroads. But now she wasn't alone. All the abandoned migrants waited with her. The ones who died and the ones who lived, the ones still trying and the ones who'd given up. An army of ghosts haunting the border, bearing witness to what it cost to move through the world without the right papers. Her mother's ring had bought her that knowledge, had bought her membership in that invisible nation of the displaced. It wasn't the future they'd imagined when that ring first slipped onto a young bride's finger, but it was the truth she carried now, worth more than gold worn thin by hope. Her name was Juliana Rojas. She'd paid with her mother's wedding ring to cross a border. They'd left her alone in the desert at night. She'd survived to tell the story. That had to count for something.